On its surface, this is an island like any other. It is smaller than a continent. It is surrounded by water on all sides. It's home to much flora and fauna. And its terrain is determined by a dynamic beach system with offshore bars, pounding surf, and shifting beaches. But what is unusual about this island is that it no longer exists. In 3 days' time, a storm of fearsome and unprecedented magnitude, which has since been given the deceptively gentle name Louise, will wreak havoc upon this island and its inhabitants. It will be havoc of fearsome and unprecedented magnitude. After the storm, all that will remain of the island is approximately 12 square feet of former highlands and now sits 1 foot above sea level. At low tide, pilings and driftwood from the docks at the center of the once charming coastal village, and a fishing buoy belonging to one formerly seaworthy vessel known as the Unsinkable II. It looked like this. This is a story about an island that lived and breathed beneath its inhabitants' feet, about the many lives built upon this shifting ground, and about the complicated legacies left behind by those who dared to tamper with this great entangled web. Spoiler alert, there's a good chance they're going to die in the end. But so is everyone ever. And if that's a surprise, I sincerely apologize for having broken the news. Anyway, we only have 3 days to paint a picture of this place before it gets absolutely fucking creamed. So let's get this show on the road. Enjoy the picture. The island's most notable landmark was a lighthouse, constructed of an octagonal column overlaid on a plywood and metal frame, which had a height of 93 feet and was ascended by 104 steps. It had a cute little observation deck at the top. It housed a bright light that shined every 25 seconds. 23, 22, 21. The lighthouse is a human invention, designed around one such light with the intention of aiding offshore ships with navigation. This faithful light steered many a ship away from the rocks of Destiny and other maritime hazards. The Rocks of Destiny was a local name for a feature located at the south end of the island, into which many a ship would have found itself on a dark and stormy night, smashed to smithereens. But the rocks never did claim a soul, thanks to this here trusty lighthouse. However, humankind's attempts to save itself can only go so far. There are more powerful forces here that lie beyond our control. Now you may be wondering, are there precedents for the disappearance of an island like this? Yes, there are precedents for the disappearance of an island like this. Thanks for asking. East Island, Hawaii, 2018. Hurricane. The Isle of Caprice, 1932. Tropical storm. 5 of the Solomon Islands, 2011. Accelerated sea level rise. Islands have been known to vanish from sight. Entire countries, even, are at risk of being lost to the sea. The Republic of the Maldives is an island nation 500 miles south of India. It is the smallest country in Asia, and it's getting smaller. The Maldives is made of over 1,000 islands grouped into 26 atolls. Its average height above sea level of 4 feet 11 inches gives it the lowest elevation of any country on planet Earth, and it's getting lower. The Maldives is susceptible to sea level rise that acts faster than in other parts of the world. Sea levels there rose an inch a year from 2017 to 2020. It's really fast. Oh my God. The islanders of the Maldives may be in for a grim fate. Their leaders may have to relocate their entire nation to India or Sri Lanka or Australia. Now, islands can change in the additive direction as well. There is evidence that coral islands like those of the Maldives can grow when storms deposit offshore sediment onto them. But the odds of this outpacing sea level rise in the Maldives is like waiting for a heroin addiction to give you superpowers. 80% of the Maldives may be uninhabitable by 2050. Islands are far from the static ground they appear to be. They shift and change from each moment to the next. And the island of Smuggler's Cove was as much of a living, breathing entity as the wildlife that called it home. To understand anything about this island and its downfall, we must get familiar with the Salt Marsh. The Salt Marsh is an invention of the creator of the universe. It's designed as a type of coastal wetland, intended to be the meeting place between planet Earth's two great spheres, the entirety of the ocean and the entirety of the land. Salt marshes mediate the interactions between these two realms, serving as the gatekeeper for each. They're so critical to marine life that, for example, 3/4 of all the seafood caught in this state spends at least part, if not all, of their life in salt marshes. Fish use them as nursery grounds that are safer than the open ocean. Birds raise their young in the grasses. They're full of food and habitat and little crabs. Salt marshes are as biologically productive as tropical rainforests. That is in reference to how well salt marshes can create life out of what is not living. I think they'd care if I pull up this stake. And when they were here, these salt marshes cared for terrestrial life too. See, salt marshes keep coastlines from being eaten up by the sea. But while these salt marshes could save others from the darkness, in the end, the only ones they could not save was themselves. This lighthouse was painted with red and white stripes. These red and white stripes were chosen by a human being named Charles Fraser, who thought they would look nice in contrast to surrounding waters that had seen a great deal of disaster and misfortune. I see no reason to disagree with him. Charles Fraser first came to the island during the summer of 1950 to work in the logging camp operated by his father. Fraser the Younger was drawn to the natural beauty of the island, which was at the time home to only 500 other people. Charles Fraser would be inspired to great and daring things by this natural beauty, and thus began his quest. A quest that would change this place forever. Prior to Fraser's arrival, this island held a long history of darkness. These waters were a graveyard, home to a great many dangers and tragedies. A warm-up example, the spiked dick of Neptune. Wooden shipbuilding was once the biggest manufacturing industry in this state. These forests were the perfect place to cut down trees and float them downstream to shipbuilders, and many a ship was built, but also many a log lost on the voyage. As these logs sank, they soaked in equal parts water and slow burning vengeance. Also called deadheads, the tips of many logs bobbed out in these waves, The full weight of a tree waiting below the surface to gouge the hull of passing ships. They were hidden danger, sending unsuspecting sailors to an early grave. Though far less deadly than the conflicts for which those ships were built. Civil War battles raged along this coast, sending many down to J.V. Jones' lacquer. Pirates slipped among the inlets and islands, terrorizing and sinking passing ships. Ships that would soon be mere wreckage down in the inky black water. But it's not the powers of man that sailors here feared the most. In 1780, the British Navy lost 24 ships to hurricanes along this stretch of coast. These storms may have been enough to turn the tide of the Revolutionary War. Dozens of wrecks lay silent in these murky waters, sunk symbols of terror and tragedy. Countless lives reclaimed by the vast, indifferent sea. Countless tales of lust for gold, striving for glory and yearning for power, only to be washed away like the shifting sands. Lives but borrowed from a horizon beyond which we cannot see. Each soul returning to the great source whose depths we cannot measure. It was at this time that our narrator started to feel the full weight of the darkness and tragedy that have plagued these waters. Gosh, I'm really feeling the full weight of the darkness and tragedy that have plagued these waters. There were over 40 known shipwrecks off the coast of the island of Smuggler's Cove, and even more in the surrounding ocean. They lay beneath the waves next to other, even more sinister symbols of darkness. One of the many inventions of war is the nuclear bomb. Sunken off this coast was one such weapon, dropped as a result of a mid-air collision between two U.S. Air Force planes in 1958. It looked like this. This Mark 15 nuclear bomb still sits on the ocean floor, intact and full of uranium and plutonium and ill wishes for the enemies of the U.S. Air Force. Its exact whereabouts are not known. It is now a lost relic of these humans' attempts to grapple with forces of nature beyond their control. And these efforts, exciting as they may have first seemed, would have consequences. When Charles Fraser first arrived here, most of his fellow islanders were farmers, oyster catchers, and fishermen who traveled by boat to the mainland to sell their goods. Fishing is a human invention that has been handed down since the Upper Paleolithic, 40,000 years ago. It was designed to remove fish from bodies of water. Many human beings have been sustained in the past 40,000 years due to fishing, which has made it a very popular activity among human beings.
Let's come on down and chunk some of this shit.
In fact, fishing has become so popular that many human beings over time have had to overhaul their findings about the hobbies of the creator of the universe. This is in part due to fishing's ability to serve as an economic backbone and a provider of monetary compensation. Now, the fishermen of the island, upon greeting one another in the morning before departing the docks for a day of fishing, would have exchanged a friendly gesture.
Kireitä siimoja.
Had they been from Finland? That's what people say in Finland. It means tight lines, in reference to fishing lines that would soon be weighed down by fish that could serve as an economic backbone and a provider of monetary compensation. Charles Fraser, attracted to the potential economic backbone and monetary compensation attributable to the island of Smuggler's Cove, purchased a large portion of his father's land holdings and began developing it. He started digging and diking and uprooting with a plan in mind. back at the Salt Marsh.
The Salt Marsh is a recurring setting for this story. It holds the story together, so to speak.
The Salt Marsh is a recurring setting for our story. It holds the island together, so to speak. An important feature of the Salt Marsh is that it stinks to the high heavens. This is sulfur. It's a member of the periodic table of the elements, which is also home to uranium and plutonium. This mud is full of the smell of sulfur, but one man's trash is another Spartina alterniflora's treasure. Spartina alterniflora, otherwise known as salt marsh cordgrass. It's the plant that holds this marsh together. That is, it holds together the edges of the island itself, which isn't such an easy job. The salt marsh is a harsher place than it looks. Living in it requires the ability to tolerate water that ranges from pretty clean and clear to mucky and saline coming off the ocean and sometimes full of runoff from the land. And Spartina can grow in salinity that would kill most plants, binding the soil and trapping sediments as they flow through the marsh. These sediments can accumulate into more and more habitat, and thus more and more island. As the seasons pass, Spartina and other plants die and decompose, forming layers of peat that are several feet thick. This peat contains very little oxygen and is full of bacteria that produce
sulfur compounds as they decompose the plants and recycle them into new life.
They recycle them into new life. The bacteria, the ones that produce the sulfur compounds, in case you didn't hear that. Hence the biological productivity of the salt marsh. These plants create stable habitat in a little world that is always changing. And in doing so, they create stable habitat in a very big world that is always changing. But historically, salt marshes have been treated like the shit they smell like. That is foreshadowing. Uh-oh. The natural beauty for which the island is so recognized also includes dolphins, among whom fishing happens to be a very popular activity. Dolphins are an invention of the creator of the universe. They are mammals, designed to produce milk for their babies, to belong to the clade Odontoceti, to communicate with a system of squeaks, whistles, and clicks, and to swim mostly in the ocean. Yangtze River dolphins, a subspecies, were designed to swim in rivers in China, to collide with boat propellers, and to drink industrial sludge until they didn't have to be designed to do anything anymore. Taking the easy way out. Ah! Strand feeding is a dolphin invention. It's where they corral a group of fish and herd them into a confused blob that they then push until it's stranded on the shore. The dolphins can then beach themselves right next to the blob of confused fish and let them fall flip-flop-flop right into their mouths. Human beings have long assumed they were smarter than dolphins because they invented at least 3 things, including the mustache guard, the Mark 15 nuclear bomb, and the World Wide Web, a system for near instantaneous global communication. Human beings also invented the term the tragedy of the commons, which describes a shared resource acted upon by individuals according to their own short-term self-interest, rather than in the interest of maintaining the shared resource for the long-term benefit of the group. Human beings noticed the need for this term as they got better at fishing. Big dreams in hand, Charles Fraser and co. began dismantling the natural beauty that so inspired them, transforming it into the components of a world-class resort for other human beings. They made room for a low-density development of residential and commercial buildings, and the first of 4 championship-caliber golf courses. Thousands of tourists and golf enthusiasts and professionals and so on poured into Fraser's new community each year. He and his team pioneered new ways to develop and manage land. He sold new oceanfront lots and built hotels. Business boomed. Golf is an invention of human beings. It is a sport, making use of clubs to hit a ball into a hole, ideally in the fewest number of uses of the clubs. Golf makes use of manicured grass, which is pumped full of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium belong to the periodic table. They look like this. Differences in grass are critical to the game of golf, as they introduce an element of unpredictability and challenge, with the intention of keeping players on their toes. Charles Fraser saw immense value in the prospect of keeping players on their toes, and that he did. Boy, were those players sure on their toes. What a game!
Excellent job, Charles.
We sure are on our toes. Thanks, Charles.
Phosphorus.
When on its toes, a golf player emits chemicals in its brain. One of these chemicals, dopamine, is responsible for feeling pleasure as part of the brain's reward system. It may be produced by the feeling of getting it in the hole, the smell of cookies baking in the oven, or the feeling of getting it in the hole. Dopamine looks like this. Charles Fraser's brain released dopamine in response to seeing his mere vision of the island transform into a marketable product to be enjoyed by more and more his fellow human beings. But this vision's realization was contingent upon the disassembly of the natural features that had inspired it, such as
Wading birds.
live oaks, Spartina,
And a variety of little fish, crabs, and shrimps.
Dolphin Brains released dopamine in response to eating a variety of little fish, crabs, and shrimps. And strand feeding. Strand feeding's popularity as a dolphin fishing method has been constrained, considering that it must be passed from one individual dolphin to the next. Prior to the impending destruction of the island of Smuggler's Cove's sandbars, this was one of the few places on planet Earth where strand feeding was performed. This is because dolphins have yet to invent a system for near-instantaneous global communication like the World Wide Web. All they have is a system of squeaks, whistles, and clicks. To our knowledge, dolphins have yet to invent a term like the tragedy of the commons. But scientists from institutions designed to expand the human brain and extort money from children have recently discovered fascinating things about the capabilities of dolphin brains, and as it turns out, they're far more like us than we ever believed. As progress progressed, Charles Fraser took a moment and stood not far from here and looked out at what he created. Up to this point, he had been busting his ass. Oh, that way. He and his growing team developed 5,200 acres on the island. They took a giant untouched swamp and turned it into a money-making machine. They bled, they sweated, they teared, cried, whatever. They built a lighthouse. Now listen, because this is important. At the same time, heavy industry started to move into the area to support a growing population. Fraser made new and powerful friends who helped him boom his business. The peace and quiet and beauty that Fraser so cherished was being paved over as bridges were built and oil was refined and marshes were being cleared out for automobile traffic. Fraser's oceanside resort looked nothing like the tranquil 500-person village with which he first fell in love. And as anyone from Finland watching this unfold would have asked,
Tuhoaako hän asian, jota hän rakasti eniten?
is he destroying the thing he loved the most? Now in this reflective moment that Fraser took, splashing against his left and right ankles were molecules known to exist in very few places aside from planet Earth. Water. Planet Earth sits alone in outer space. It is the only known place in the universe where these molecules, the ones splashing Charles Fraser's right and left ankles, are known to be transformed by salt marshes into the components of living things. In this exact moment, these particular molecules were part of an unbroken string that extended from Charles Fraser's right and left ankles to every living dolphin that relied on fish, crabs, and shrimp. The dolphins, meanwhile, were aligned with the fins and wondered if Fraser had some kind of daddy issues driving his behavior. This unbroken string also included every inhabitant of the Republic of the Maldives who was standing in the water at that exact moment. It also extended further to great collections of these molecules, which were closely packed together and shared a distinct amount of structural rigidity. These were an invention of the creator of the universe, designed to regulate the one planet that could support life. And while he stood in this water, the handiwork of Charles Fraser and his associates was reducing the structural rigidity of these ice formations. Hurricanes are severe storms with high-velocity winds that rotate around a central, low-pressure core. Their formation is dependent upon two things. First, they need warm, high-energy water. And second, they need a weather disturbance. A thunderstorm, for example, will pull in warm air off of the ocean from all sides. This warm air collides with air coming from other directions, and it is forced upward. As that air is pushed up, it cools and condenses, forming rain and clouds, and it releases its heat into the surrounding air, which then rises even more. This rising air creates a vacuum, sucking in even more air from below.
Now, as she migrated over the ocean, Louise intensified as she took in more energy from the surrounding water. Louise was a Category 5 by the time she reached the island, meaning that she sustained winds of at least 155 miles per hour. Now, this is the path that she took on her way to the island. She really is a beautiful case study.
These storms are capable of inflicting catastrophic loss of life.
As the planet's oceans increase in temperature, we're seeing more highly energetic hurricanes like Louise.
A kind of hell on earth.
The warmer the water, the more energy that can be pulled into the storm system.
The reckoning of an angry god.
The most damaging hurricanes are 3 times more frequent than they were a century ago.
Now this is a brief tale about 2 shells that might have been considered Charles Fraser's friends. This particular shell was assembled by a clam. Oh, it wasn't. This is an oyster. Hold on. This is a shell. A shell is an invention of the creator of the universe. This particular shell was assembled by a clam. The clam assembled this shell using calcium carbonate, which the clam pulled from the surrounding water. Calcium carbonate looks like this. It's a popular ingredient for shells and skeletons of marine organisms like oysters, sea urchins, scallops, starfish, crabs, corals, snails, zooplankton, and so on. Corals, snails, zooplankton, and so on are popular menu items for the diets of larger marine organisms, meaning that they play a critical role in all marine food webs. In other words, calcium carbonate is a direct or indirect component of just about every living thing in the ocean. This is also a shell. It is an invention of a human being named Marcus Samuel. He was not known to be malicious, at least not more so than the average person. We all have our moments.
Just go fucking crazy. I hate this shit.
Shell is a British multinational, vertically integrated oil and gas company active in every area of the industry, including exploration, production, refining, transport, distribution and marketing, petrochemicals, power generation, and transport. Trading, fucking goddammit. It's trading. The last one is trading. They do a lot of stuff. It has a red and yellow logo. It is one of the most recognizable logos in the world. It is not made of calcium carbonate. It is, however, made of the same kind of intestinal fortitude that enabled Charles Fraser's vision of progress. Shell and its variants enabled much of the development that happened in and around the island. When shell products are used, they create a molecule that looks like this: carbon dioxide. It's famous for being the food of trees and plants like Spartina. It's famous for being exhaled by human beings. I just farted. That's CO2 for you. It is also famous for being a critical component of the carbon cycle, which is part of what makes planet Earth habitable to living things. But too much of it can cause problems. Carbon dioxide is absorbed by the ocean. This makes the ocean more acidic. Increased acidity binds to calcium carbonate in the water, thus taking it away from marine life that needs it to form skeletons and shells. One of these shells is becoming smaller, thinner, and more fragile. One of these shells is acidifying the ocean, making shells smaller, thinner, and more fragile. Carbon dioxide also blankets planet Earth, trapping excess heat from the sun.
Since the invention of shells with red and yellow logos, planet Earth has experienced a rise in temperature. Correlation in this case having much to do with causation. And causation in this case having much to do with the carbon dioxide created by human beings. The deconstruction of glaciers under the influence of carbon dioxide created by human beings is a curious side effect of the invention of heavy industry. The shift from solid to liquid water may increase the height of seas around the world by 6 feet before the end of the century. Places like the Maldives and the island of Smuggler's Cove will likely experience even higher local increases in water level. The consequences of sea level rise will not be distributed fairly. Places like this one will feel the effects more than others. Hence our narrator's plan to escape to the mountains before Louise makes landfall, to watch the waters rise from the safety of a XXL stretch Hummer H4 with jumbo-sized cup holders and a carbon fiber spoiler. That's a joke, of course. A spoiler would look ridiculous.
Now, sea level rise implies harsher hurricanes. Higher waters make for bigger storm surge, more floodwater, and so on. And as it happens, a natural defense against hurricanes and storm surge and higher waters was part of this island the whole time. This is our last visit to the Salt Marsh because they're all going to get destroyed soon. And I'm getting nose deaf to the smell, which I think might be a dangerous game to play. Good riddance. So they may have said, those who riddanced them. Over half of the salt marshes in the United States have been dismantled to make room for agriculture, industry, homes, and championship caliber golf courses. And since salt marshes stabilize the land, there is a cost to this destruction. Salt marshes provide a number of critical services to the land and sea. Oh, right up the main line. 1. Salt marshes absorb runoff, which would otherwise become ocean pollution, 80% of which comes from the land and is very difficult to pinpoint, such as runoff from industry, golf courses, H4 Hummers with jumbo-sized cup holders. 2. Of all the types of habitat on the planet, salt marshes have one of the best chances to keep pace with sea level rise. This is in part due to the fact that they keep pace with changing tides every day. And plants like Spartina can trap sediments and store carbon. But when they're dug out and filled in and transformed into used car dealerships, it makes it much more difficult for the land to keep pace with the rising sea. 3. Salt marshes buffer against storms. They can break up wave energy before it reaches the coast. During a storm surge, the salt marsh acts like a giant sponge. They absorb large volumes of water that would otherwise flood the land. A single acre of salt marsh can absorb 1.5 million gallons of water. That's like holding back 2¼ Olympic swimming pools from coming in and blowing the backs out of homes and infrastructure. Yet, the United States erases 80,000 acres of salt marsh every year. NASA has recorded a global loss equivalent to 2 soccer fields of salt marsh every hour, which is a weird unit of measurement to use. But it's a lot. And 4, even if the oceans weren't rising, and glaciers weren't being dismantled, and hurricanes weren't becoming more energetic, salt marshes are what we in the business refer to as beautiful. The human brain evolved to provide the intelligence needed for empathy, charisma, intelligence, and culture, which as a byproduct made it powerful enough to create golf and bulldozers and vacation communities and to delete 2 soccer fields worth of salt marsh every hour. It's a brain shaped by the requirements of a complex social life. And this, according to those who've paid enough attention to them, is a shared characteristic of the brains of dolphins and whales. Overwhelming evidence has emerged that these air-breathing, milk-making mammals have social lives every bit as complex as those of human beings. Dolphins and whales have remarkable social intelligence and are known to create cultures and dialects and even names for each other. That is, according to reputable sources, pretty goddamn spiffy. These sources suggested that dolphins may actually be capable of building the great metropolises and technologies of human beings, but are restricted by a glaring lack of opposable thumbs. This is what the researchers had to say about dolphins.
They won't ever mimic our great metropolises and technologies because they didn't evolve opposable thumbs.
This may have been all that kept the dolphins from the island of Smuggler's Cove from their own version of aquatic world domination. Wow. Thumbs are a powerful tool which must be wielded with care, because with great power comes great ability to repeat the blueprint elsewhere. Ow. In the decades following his successful development of the island of Smuggler's Cove, Charles Fraser repeated the blueprint elsewhere, and he was awarded for his efforts. Fraser developed plot after plot. He collected accolade after accolade. but not just because of his ability to attract visitors. No, in fact, Fraser was awarded for how ecologically mindful his work was. See, Charles Fraser was never meant to be the villain of this story. His development of the island would actually be hailed for its sensitivity and for how well it protected the natural beauty. He said, and I quote,
"There's no law of economics that says ugliness pays. I selected beauty and set out to make it work economically."
Fraser emphasized painting homes with earth tones, landscaping with native plants, and blending with nature as much as possible rather than overpowering it. Fraser even halted the construction of this marina to prevent a single oak tree from being destroyed. What a tree. My God. Prior to its destruction, the island of Smuggler's Cove enjoyed an unusual amount of tree cover. He also set up provisions for the protection of alligators. Crikey! And though some of the salt marshes were displaced, the vast majority of them were protected and meant to inspire visitors. And between you and me, it wouldn't have mattered if they destroyed them all, because these guys, well, they were fucked anyway. Bless my balls, it is a big storm. Sorry, bud. It was not Fraser who destroyed this place, but, as we said, the effects of a changing planet are not distributed fairly. He protected lands that otherwise might have been clear-cut by the forestry company for which he first worked, the one from which he purchased the land back when this place was but a lighthouse-themed twinkle in his eye. Regardless, his efforts would suffer the consequences of Hurricane Louise. He would not be there to witness it. One of these shells is a popular ingredient in automobiles, planes, homes, lubricants, plastics, and boats. On December 15th, 2002, Fraser was on board a 28-foot yacht in the Caribbean. It exploded and sent him flying into the water, where he drowned. It was fatal. Completely fatal. The explosion was caused by a faulty fuel tank. Prior to the accident, that fuel tank had been filled with gasoline. One of these shells makes for a cute nautical-themed necklace. The other, well, let's just say it befriended government lobbyists and forgot about good old Charlie Fraser. Does that look like I'm holding something? The legacy of Charles Fraser is complicated, as are those of his various accomplices. They carved out an opportunity for people to enjoy the island of Smuggler's Cove. I love this place, goddammit. While accidentally engineering its downfall in the process. Which also implies some controversy regarding the entire legacy of the opposable thumb.
Across this land, there's a feeling you get of working people doing their best.
Looking to our future, keeping the dream alive.
This time, we have a choice. Someone who's standing up for all of our tomorrow. Someone who cares for us and protects this time.
After all, the final question among researchers remained. If dolphins' lack of thumbs restricted them, limiting them to activities like pass the pufferfish and strand feeding, or if this lack of thumbs enabled them to avoid sitting in traffic and filing taxes, instead freeing them up for activities like pass the pufferfish and strand feeding. With any amount of luck and no small amount of martyrdom on behalf of the island of Smuggler's Cove, there's a chance that this principle of appreciating and supporting the life that supports us may continue to recover. Godspeed, we say. In the meantime, got a flight to catch.